But I think I wanted to start our conversation today by just getting an update from the three of you on where things stand right now, and you're all part of the same kind of school community, education community here in Corpus, but you represent different aspects. So it'd be good to just kind of to get a short briefing on how things are going. Would you like to start,
Sure.
Dr. Alvarado?
Yes. Just give you a little bit of background of who we are. And so we serve 49 traditional districts and charter
49
schools
now. Okay.
in our region. And of those 49 districts, 36 of them, were declared under Governor's Declaration proclamation. So we serve a little over 105,000 students in our region. And of those 105, 100,000 kids were impacted, are being served by the districts and charter schools in our region. So kind of give you just a really perspective. And so we work really closely with the Texas Education Agency, and our Commissioner Morath has been really purposeful in making sure that the support systems that schools need were provided from day one. So we have had a lot of conversations, and we also work with Del Mar College in making sure that all our resources are being channeled in the most appropriate way so that we're not duplicating efforts.
Mm-hmm.
So Del Mar College serves a service area of 4.5 counties. That's Nueces, San Patricio, Aransas, Kennedy, and part of Claiborne County. And as such, that's 500,000 people, more or less, dispersed in those counties. Aransas and San Patricio County took the brunt of the storm. And so from a financial standpoint, really where we are, there's two parts I want to talk about, financial and then the demographics part. We're bouncing back. Our budgets were large going into the storm. We were preparing, we were budgeting for a 5% enrollment. We were at 6% actual, 98% paid. We were in an ideal situation. I won't say perfect storm today, but we were getting ready for this and going into the storm. Once the storm hit, we were 4 points down. That was a 10-point spread. That financially impacted us. We left these large classrooms open. These large number of classrooms with small enrollments in them, gave students money back with no questions asked, those sorts of things. That's kind of the setup for the financial situation that we're really in right now. We're okay. We froze some dollars midstream, and we're hanging on to those dollars to close out the year flat, probably a little bit of excess. So that's the financial standpoint, and we still haven't closed out our summer enrollment, and that's what we're waiting for as summer approaches quickly. That's kind of the scenario that way. We're managing our dollars because our enrollment took that hit. Our families are starting to recover, especially in the northern part of our district, in the San Patricio and Aransas counties, and all throughout Refugio and all around up on the upper coast from Corpus Christi. Where the thing that's different from our sister colleges up the coast is the rooftops left in our counties. Floods came and went, still terrible both scenarios, but with those rooftops left, when they left, the families left. And so we're slowly finding them coming back at this point. That's just kind of a general snapshot of where we are right now.
Okay. Superintendent.
Port Aransas ISD is a 2A district just up the road here on Mustang Island. And our school district, just like our entire community, took a beating from Harvey. We had the wind damage as well as the flood damage from rains and from storm surge. And so our little district was closed for 7 weeks after Hurricane Harvey hit, with the majority of our students having to enroll in school and wherever they were displaced to, quite a few in Flower Bluff ISD and other school districts. And so after 7 weeks, we were able to get back open in our school district, but we weren't in any of our buildings. We had to bring in temporary portable classroom buildings for every single classroom in the district. And so that was difficult, but I think at the same time, within just a couple of weeks of reopening, after October 16th, when we reopened, we had 92% of our students re-enroll in Port Aransas ISD. Many of them came back to homes that we would say are unlivable. Others are still commuting every day from Flower Bluff or Corpus Christi, which weren't hit quite so bad, to come to school every day. But we had incredible community support from our city from all of our families to get our schools back open because it was important to them. They felt like it was the hope that our community would recover when the schools reopened in Port Aransas. After the Christmas holidays in January, we reopened our high school and our elementary with basically every surface in both of those schools having to be replaced as a result of the storm. We are still in portable buildings for our middle school, but it is almost done. And actually, since we only have a couple weeks of school left, we're going to be moving as soon as school is out back into the middle school. And then we're repairing outdoor facilities right now.
Wow. So, I mean, doors closed for 7 weeks out of school, and Dr. Alvarado, maybe you can address this, for the other school districts in the district as well. What kinds of challenges do you face when you have student? And I know part of the problem is sometimes some of your student population doesn't come back; they are displaced. They go to other districts. But I mean, what as an educator, what kinds of challenges do educators face when not only have they encountered their own losses, but they're dealing with students who may or may not have been enrolled in schools in other places,
right.
And they're coming from a very chaotic situation.
Right.
7 weeks is a pretty big chunk of the
It's a long
school
time.
year. Yeah.
It's a long time. Well, again, there are quite a few challenges. And first of all, for the schools like Flower Bluff and others, they were starting school as well. They had plans in place. They had schedules done and classroom rosters done. And here comes, a few hundred Port Aransas kids into their schools. And I just can't say enough for that partnership that we have with Flower Bluff and other school districts who welcomed our students in with open arms, went above and beyond. Our students had everything they needed, every school supply, backpack, clothes, you name it. The community in many school districts, but especially the majority at Flower Bluff, just went above and beyond to welcome our students. Our staff members, who again were also dealing with their own personal losses, showed up at Flower Bluff, just to welcome our students and make sure they saw a friendly face every single day. Our coaches went out there to work with our students. And so we're just really grateful for that partnership and how welcoming they were to us and how they realized it would be good for our students, but I'd also say it was good for our staff to see their students. One of the stories I heard from Flower Bluff was our high school principal went over there to meet with our students that were enrolled there one day just to check in with them and see how they were doing. And they were more worried about their teachers. Are our teachers okay? Are our teachers, going to still have jobs? Are they still getting paid? And all of those things. And so that just meant a lot to us that our students were concerned about their teachers back in Port Aransas. When we reopened on October 16th, there were all kinds of logistical challenges with having every single classroom in the district in a portable building. We even went across the street to the First Baptist Church that had horrible damage too, just so we could have a room big enough to have band rehearsals in. So everybody just came together. We made it work. We had an incredible company come in to do our reconstruction Gerloff, who they went out of their way to make things work for us when it was every day, every day moving fences, every day doing whatever they had to do to make sure our kids could go back and forth to the playground, go back and forth to the cafeteria and things like that. So lots and lots of logistics. And what I try to explain to people is that as educators, we are used to rallying around kids and families that are in crisis. When there's a death in the family or a tragedy, that's what we do. We rally around them. And I think in this situation, what has been the hardest is that all of our kids and families were in a chaotic, disastrous situation, but so was all of our staff. I think if we had to turn in for the state, if you applied the same criteria that we use to code students as homeless to our staff, last fall it was over 80% of our staff would have been considered homeless. Before spring break, it was still a third of our staff would have still been considered homeless. And so that was a different kind of challenge. It was good in a way. We were all in the same boat. We all kind of understood what the other person was going through and what our kids were going through when, the first time it actually got cold in Port Aransas this fall and, or this winter, and the first time it got cold and you had no idea if you had a jacket or gloves, or for some of our kids, they hadn't put on a pair of real shoes, since the storm, and just having to, do you have it? And if you do, where is it? Because you're still displaced somewhere. So some of those challenges were really exponential. And it was just, we had to learn to kind of see things a different way, to accept help. We're used to helping our teachers, our families are used to helping others. And so we had to be receptive and accept help. And people have been so kind and so generous. We continue to have just some challenges with students and staff being displaced from their homes still, or moving back into homes that aren't quite ready yet, but they had to have a place to live. Obviously, there's some anxiety and stress that we all deal with, but we've, again, had a lot of support. We brought some support in, and we just help each other out. That's what community does.
Well, speaking of logistics, I want to ask you about the partnership with Flower Bluff. Is that something that was kind of part of an emergency plan ahead of time, or is that something that kind of evolved in the need of the moment?
I would say it evolved, but evolved quickly.
Yeah.
It was, as soon as we figured out, within basically a week after the storm, we knew that, when you first see it, you think, okay, maybe it's not that bad, but it was that bad. Every single square foot in the district had damage to it. And so I honestly don't remember if I reached out to them first or they reached out to me first, but it felt like it was overnight, when I had to. And that's the worst feeling in the world, to have to tell your families you're going to have to go enroll somewhere else.
Yeah.
I don't know how long this is going to take. But they immediately jumped on it, and they held a special registration for our kids. I mean, we talked every day. We did busing. I mean, we did things that, from what I understand, no one had ever done before. But we were just looking for ways to make things work for our kids and for our families. And so, again, it was just every day, every morning, every night, we were talking, what else do we need to do? What have we not thought of? What came up today, and how can we solve it? Mm-hmm. And so I would say it evolved quickly more than anything.
Yeah.
I mean, we've always had a good relationship. But what a blessing it was that they're 25, 30 minutes down the road, and they didn't have anywhere near the damage that we had. Mm-hmm. And so they were able to accept our kids and accept our families, and not just accept them, but really go out of their way to not only teach them, but love them and take care of them.
That's great. And Dr. Alvarado, so you said about 100,000 students in the region that your ESC serves were affected by Hurricane Harvey. What do you know about how those students are doing today? How many of them have returned to districts in the region? Do you have any kind of big picture idea of how things are going there?
I don't know the exact number, but I can give you Rockport, Aransas County. So pre-Harvey, there were a little over 3,000 students enrolled. Post-Harvey, there are about a little over 2,500 enrolled. So they have lost about 600, 500 kids. So it goes back to what Sharon was talking about, is that they don't have a home to come to. So they can't come back to work, or their parents don't have jobs to go work where they used to work. So they're choosing to stay wherever they're at. However, I think I want to add to what Sharon's story, because I think it speaks to the partnerships that superintendents in our region have formed over time. And right after the storm, the superintendents who weren't as impacted, like the 6 districts who were in our region who were very heavily impacted, were calling. So once things got settled down, maybe like a week afterwards, we started having daily conference calls with our superintendents who were impacted, and then those others how can we support? So Gregory Portland ISD, they took in over 7,000 students from the other districts who were impacted by the hurricane, and Sinton as well, and Taft. And so it was just about they weren't worried about how they were going to pay for all these things, because that wasn't on their radar. They were worried about how do we help serve these kids who we want to have an education. And also the Texas Education Agency, Commissioner Morath made a phone call as well about, so how do we educate these kids, because we can't have them out of school for such long periods of time. So it was about everyone working together, about sharing textbooks, sharing computers, sharing all those resources, and not worried about the accountability of all of those resources. And I think the agency was really instrumental in helping us to streamline some processes and some procedures and protocols to be able to get those things done. And Commissioner Morath and the agency staff were always, what do you need? What can we do? What rule do we have to change to make sure it happens? And then, of course, our elected officials. They were very instrumental in making sure that districts like Sharon's and others receive the resources that they needed.
So it sounds like some these partnerships, there are relationships that exist prior to when a natural disaster strikes, because necessarily in communication, but a lot of this kind of planning has to take place after the emergency happens, because you just don't know which districts are going to be hit, which districts are going to have what resources and which needs.
Right. And it wasn't just school districts either. Like, for example, as soon as we had to make the call to encourage our folks to enroll somewhere else, you know, we went to the district and got all of our student records and took them to the service center. We kind of moved into a room on the 3rd floor at the service center with our staff, so that when our students did go enroll in another district, whether it was Bluff or somewhere in Texas or even out of state, we were able to use the service center's technology and facilities to get those records, because we wanted, our kids were already in chaos, and we wanted to make that transition as smooth as possible. When we had this special enrollment day for our students at Flower Bluff ISD, Del Mar showed up, because we had so many kids that were taking dual credit classes through our partnership with Del Mar for college and high school credit. And here we were, already a couple of weeks behind. They had been closed. The Bluff had even been closed for a week, and we have all these online classes and dual credit, and what do we do? And they were there, and they just talked to every single student individually and figured out a way to make it work.
Yeah.
So that our students wouldn't lose their opportunity to earn college credit because of the storm. And so it was everybody. I mean, everybody jumped in and worked together. I can't say enough about our city officials, our county officials, constantly reaching out to me, what can we do to help? And sometimes it was something real simple, and sometimes it was something really major, like we really need electricity back on, and what can we do to help make that work? And so it was everybody just working together, really kind of the epitome of what communities are supposed to be like, where everybody jumps in to help everybody out.
And Dr. Escamilla, what did it look like at the community college level when you had to shut doors and figure out how you were going to win and how you were going to reopen and what that was going to look like financially?
So ultimately, we were supposed to start on the 28th, and we pushed the date out only a week. So because the storm, went to the north of us, the eye of the storm, went to the north of us, we sustained relatively minimal damage, all things considered. We had some. Power outage was our biggest challenge, lines down, that sort of thing. We're only as strong as our partnerships, our relationships. I've said that for a long time. I believe it now more than ever. And so we became a command center for the city and the county. We have a FEMA emergency hurricane storm shelter dome.
The shelter there, yeah.
And I slept in it that night. Wow. And I stayed back because I didn't want to leave a lot of things. You've ridden out a few hurricanes with Dad over the years, and then you become your dad and all that other weird stuff. But I had a dome. Don't feel sorry for me. I knew so many people were out in the community. We were staying in touch that way. I was in the dome, and I was more than okay with all the police officers and firefighters and so forth. We turned the keys over, became the command center to the city and the county.
So this is you sheltered at
our West campus,
at your college,
our FEMA dome at our West campus. Yeah. So, in less than a year after commissioning that dome, we had 2 water emergencies, and we turned it over, and then a hurricane just like that. I mean, it's like we opened the door and used it right away for other things than the instruction as we're using it now. So that was kind of the scenario there. We just turned over everything we could. All of our resources, did everything we could. But here's the interesting thing. When I came out of the dome at 5:30 in the morning after landfall at 10 o'clock that night, I had those who know me, I only drive a pickup truck. And there's a reason why. I had it loaded down and everything else, and I was there with the police officers, and as soon as they scooted out at 5:30, I just blended in with them and jumped out and got in my truck. They were telling us not to go. I didn't hear that. And so I jumped out in the community, and I went, and I had to go check on the campuses and everything else, check on Mom's house. They were up north. But anyway, check on all these, our own places. I just spent the whole day checking on the campuses and everything else right away. But the interesting thing that I found is when I got there was nobody around. There weren't any police officers. They were out working. Yeah. And it was the most eerie feeling to think that I was it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, usually I rely on other people to be it in those circumstances. And it was the most enlightening moment to sit there and say, my fences are down, my campus is okay, the campuses are okay, They're kind of trashed with limbs and other things like that. And so I said, quickly, I need to get back to the dome and re-engage and be the command center, start bringing resources and folks back to the campus. We had a team of 2 or 3 facilitating the dome. So quickly, you learn that no matter what plan you may have in place, it is a situational leadership type of opportunity for anybody who goes through it. You just have to deal with what you have. I think it becomes the who first. The who is the most important thing. Who do you have available? And go from there kind of scenario. So again, relationships being what they were, we were able to quickly come back online, but then the details of the damage in our northern part of our service area started coming in, and it really began to sink in, the devastation that truly was the effects of the storm. Outside of that, again, we did everything we could to provide for those students. There were many students who just came back and say, hey, I don't have a house anymore. That $1,200 I gave you for tuition is all I have. No questions asked, give it back to them.
Wow.
We said, you do not get to sit there and question people. And for the most part, we believe only those who needed it asked for it, and they got it back. And that was just, we got the team set up as quickly as we could to accommodate that. And we adjusted schedules with all of our dual credit partners. And we have, at the time, I think we had 2,400 dual credit students. Those are great partnerships with all of our high schools, as Sharon was saying, all throughout the ESC. And we did everything we could to accommodate. And what our teams did within the district, within the college, to provide for those students was, it's just it's a tremendous human story. It really is.
What percentage, do you have an idea of what percentage of your enrollment that you ended up losing after the storm?
So we ended up 4% down, 4% of about 11,500. That's a round number.
Okay.
So several hundred students were gone, and then what we did was we shifted and implemented smaller semesters within the 16-week traditional semester, and saw them kind of coming back a little. And then in the spring semesters when we leveled out, if you will.
Okay.
And so we think we made up most of that 4% in the spring. Some of those were obviously new students, but we leveled out, and I think we continue to see them on a regular basis, kind of trickling in. Some we've just lost to other school districts up north. But that negative 4% when we were 6% up, that 10-point spread is, we won't make it back, but we're doing good to just come back to a flat scenario.
And I wanted to ask about your dome. Is this like a sporting, or what kind of facility is it exactly? And was it in the plant? You had said you had used it for previous emergencies. Was that kind of something you had in mind when you constructed it?
It is a FEMA emergency. It's a storm shelter.
Okay, so
it's
was
built for the hurricane.
Built for that.
It is
on your campus.
On our campus. It was through FEMA. There are several in the city. Tolosa Midway, I think, has a couple. Calallen has one. I think Woodsboro has one. They're all scattered along the coast. And we jumped in there several years ago when they were proposed by the federal government. And it was an investment. I just got to say, the federal government came in, and I think they paid, I don't have the final numbers in my head, but I want to say 60 cents on the dollar, maybe 50 cents on the dollar for us to build it. We couldn't say no to it. We had to pull some of our piggy bank together and invest in that. When those kind of opportunities come, and you're a kid growing up in Corpus when Celia was here and when Allen hit, and you ride those storms out, Gilbert and all these other storms, you say, I bet you that's going to be useful one day.
It's going to come in handy.
I bet you we're going to be able to use it for weird things like water situations too, but that's okay. But it is not, we do not have a football team or a baseball team.
Okay.
Yet. No, I'm just kidding. I am just kidding. But it is an instructional unit. We have close partnerships with Corpus Christi Fire Department, and we train our cadets in there. It's a classroom scenario. They do use it for skills training and all of those sorts of things. So there is big open space, and we also use it for public venues such as this.
Okay. Speaking of the federal government, I wanted to kind of ask Dr. Alvarado and the superintendent, what you've talked a little, I've heard praise so far for the legislature, though I do want to come back to that, and for local and county officials. How have your dealings been with the federal government, and what have you seen of the federal government's response?
Well, I've learned a lot. I would say for the most part, especially right after the storm, we had a lot of people reach out to us. But I guess as we all kind of know, but I really experienced nothing moves in the timeline that you want it to, even in the midst of an emergency, in the midst of a disaster. And so we learned real quick that we weren't going to sit around and wait. We had to get our schools reopened. We had to get our folks back, our kids back, our staff back. And so we did a lot ourselves. Went to several meetings, met with more people than I could ever count from FEMA and from the federal government, reaching out to us to let us know how they could help in the future. So we are pursuing FEMA public assistance for some of our, especially our outdoor facilities that were damaged, that weren't covered or not fully covered by insurance, not because we weren't insured, but just the nature of the beast. They just don't cover those things. And so it's a very long process, and you really have to go out on a limb and get things done and pay for things, and then hope that FEMA and grants or whatever else will come through to help you reimburse yourselves for the things that you've already paid for.
So you're in a situation where, as a district, you have to figure out where the money is to go, and whether it's through insurance, whether it's through other funds, fix the things you need to get fixed, and then there's the application process that happens to get the aid for reimbursement.
Right, and we've been doing the application process for almost 9 months now, for hours and hours every week.
Wow.
So it takes a very long time. It takes a lot of man hours.
And that's administrative hours that could be spent
on top of everything else.
Yeah,
on top of everything else right now.
Yeah.
So it's very long. It's very complicated. We've worked hard. I keep hearing that we're the ones that are testing things out. A lot with FEMA, and I wouldn't have known this before the storm, but now I really know. They've changed the way they do their public assistance program in the last few years, and so this is the first major disaster where they've implemented this new program, and I think they've learned some things that work and don't work. I've certainly told them about some things that work and don't work through the new program, and so it's been a challenge. It really has been a challenge. Great people. I mean, everybody wants to help. They're super nice, super compassionate, but just the whole bureaucracy, it just takes a long time. And so I think someone else earlier mentioned resiliency. We just have to work together and figure it out. We're going to do it. We're going to bring portables in. We're going to get our schools reopened, and we'll figure out later, how we're going to make it work on the books. But we got to get our kids back, and we got to get our teachers back in school.
Dr. Alvarado.
Commissioner Morath had some great insight and foresight about the frustrations that districts are probably going to encounter, because in our region, the 6 districts who were impacted the most are really small districts, and so they don't have a whole lot of support systems, other staff to be able to do those things, because it really falls on Sharon and her staff to do all those things. And so he asked us to hire a person to assist them in the forms of FEMA and through that whole process, because I think one of the frustrations that districts kept encountering was the people kept changing from FEMA, so the information that we're giving kept changing as well, so it was causing a lot of frustration. So we, along with Region 3, our sister in Region 3, hired 2 people to be able to help districts to facilitate that conversation, and those 2 individuals that we hired were part of the Galveston Ike hurricane. So they had some experience with FEMA at the time, but then some things changed. But they still were able to help them weed through a lot of those processes. And then the commissioner has also assigned Candace Stoltz as a point of contact for us and for school districts. So anytime that the districts have a question, or we have a question about this process or that organization, Candace is really good about troubleshooting for us and giving us a response, so that and kind of going through all of the stuff that has to go through. So through the commissioner and the governor, they have been really responsive and really responded in the most proactive way to be able to help our districts.
So you've been able to rely on them to some extent to provide support in dealing with FEMA and kind of figuring out the right process that needs to be followed.
Yes, when we have the conference calls, maybe for the first 6 months after the hurricane, we used to have weekly phone calls with the commissioner and his staff and talking about, okay, so what about this, what about that? And so it was really a great process for us to be able to go call the district and say, okay, so with this, here's an opportunity for us to be able to do, whether it be a grant or a resource or a support system. So he was really instrumental in making sure that districts were, what they had to worry about was getting kids back in school. And he was going to help them also think about the other processes that had to take place as well.
Okay. I wanted to shift just a little bit and ask about, I know that Commissioner Morath has waived some testing requirements for school districts that were affected by Harvey, but I want to ask kind of about the bigger accountability picture. What kind of flexibility is available to school district? Is there more that's needed? What are some of the challenges that you're seeing there?
Well, Commissioner Morath is very sensitive to the conversations the superintendents have had, and a decision has not been made on waiving the accountability system. But I know he's talking to staff about it, and will come up with some kind of a process to be able to assist some of these students who, testing was probably not on their mind.
Yeah.
Given all of the experiences that they experienced. So I think that's still yet to come.
Okay.
And just to clarify, there wasn't a large reduction in the testing this year. Basically, it was for students in grades 5 and 8, what we call the SSI grades, Student Success Initiative grades. They just don't have to take the third test. So like if they take it the first time and don't pass in the second time, there's normally a third time that happens during the summer, and that's the only thing that's been waived. So we've actually been testing every day for the last 2 weeks on our campuses. However, with the accountability, again, I think there's been a lot of, verbally we've heard a lot of what I believe will be positive regard as far as accountability goes this year, but we haven't seen anything in writing yet or any major announcements yet. But again, every single one of our families, every single one of our staff members was impacted significantly by the storm. And, in Port Aransas ISD, we're known for having that legacy of excellence. And we pride ourselves not only on test scores, but college credits and success in a lot of arenas other than just test scores. But when our teachers came back in on October 9th and we all met in the elementary cafeteria, because it was the only place we had that was almost inhabitable at the time. We all came back in, and these are teachers that have been through a lot. And one of the first things they asked me about was, what about our kids? What about testing? What about scores? And I just said, we're not worrying about that right now. We said from day one on October 9th that our goal was to do everything we could to get our students back in school, to get them reacclimated, back to normalcy, and then getting them ready to go into the next grade. So for example, I wanted to make sure all my second graders, before they walk in the door this coming August, that they're ready for third grade. And so whatever that means, because we don't want gaps to continue to grow. Some of our students went to school, a few didn't, a lot were in turmoil, and so maybe their learning wasn't to the level that we're used to, and we just said we're gonna do whatever it takes to make sure there's not a gap that continues to grow. So I want all my English 1 students ready for English 2 this coming August. I want all my 7th graders ready for 8th grade when they walk in the door this coming August. So whatever that looks like. Lots of classroom instruction since October 16th, lots of intervention. We're doing an expanded summer school. We're doing some specialized tutoring. We're working with our City Parks and Rec, who does summer camps, to do some literacy, fun activities so the kids won't know. But really implementing a lot of the literacy strategies to really help our students be successful when they come back in August. So I'm not worried about scores and accountability. Hope, again, that the commissioner and the state will give some grace in that area. We also need to remember, too, that a lot of that is from the federal government. There's a lot of that the state doesn't have any control or power over, and so the federal government would also have to step in for some of those districts and schools that may be impacted this year.
Yeah. And when you talk about trying to help students reacclimate, return to normalcy, are there steps that you've had to take outside of just kind of the instructional side, perhaps additional counseling services, things like that,
Right.
that might be a few
Yes.
steps beyond than what you would provide during a school year when a hurricane
Yes.
hadn't hit?
Yes. Well, one of the things that we did before the storm, we had a contracted service with a licensed professional counselor who worked with some of our students in middle school and high school outside of the school day. So, because there was, even before the storm, there was nothing available in Port Aransas. And so if students, families needed those services, they had to take a half a day off of school or work, go to Corpus to have their appointment. So we had already done that in a very limited capacity. After the storm, because of some generous grants from Rebuild Texas and other organizations, we were able to expand that. And one of the things we had to do was get him a place to see students. We didn't have an office.
Yeah.
We had nowhere for him to see students. And so our local education foundation funded one of those mobile offices to come in. It's still in the parking lot right next to the administration building. We call it the railroad car. But they come in and they see students. He sees students right there as a contracted service. So we were able to bring that office in so those services could continue. We've expanded them. And then just in January, we had been looking, and we were finally able to find an LPC who works with younger students, with our elementary students. Again, it's a contracted service that we just provide space for them to see our students there in our school district. And so we would love to expand that, but there's just really a lack of resources. There's not a lot of professional counselors in our area that are able to come and do that for us.
And when you say it's a contracted service, that's something it's going to come out of your school budget, or it sounds like you've been able to seek outside grants.
Yes, we've been very blessed with donations. We had so many people asking, what do you need? What do you need? And I said, well, our families need this. Our students need this. This will help our school and help our students. And so, again, very blessed by organizations stepping in to help meet that need.
So we are approaching a legislative session next year, and I just wanted to hear from the three of you, having given what you've experienced, what needs to happen, what's on your ask list from the legislature? Are there things that can be changed, can be done to help make this, when the next natural disaster hits, either in the coastal area, other parts of the state, to help school communities recover more quickly?
I think I want to, before I answer that question, I want to go back to something Sharon said about funds. And the commissioner has recently released, and he's instructed staff to streamline the process for grants applications. Because I said earlier, we have small school districts who, they don't have the time to be able to go through a document to fill out a grant. So it's a 2-3 pager now. So there's 4 grants that have recently gone out. One is emergency impact aid, and that is for school districts to apply for a grant to be able to address the needs of the students who are impacted by the storm. And they can receive anywhere from $8,500 to $10,000 depending on the needs of the student.
And these are grants that are coming that are administered through TEA?
Yes.
Okay.
And then another one is for homeless youth and children, and that is to help districts with serve the needs of those students who were displaced, they're homeless that were displaced. And then we have one that is a restart grant, and that one is available to both districts and charter schools, and along with non-public schools, private schools, to be able to restart elementary and secondary schools. And then the last one, the fourth one, is a Project Serve grant, and that one is to be able to provide support systems such as what Sharon was talking about, counseling services, and because in the districts that were impacted the most, they probably shared a counselor from the elementary and the middle school and the high school, and this will provide some more dollars to be able to provide some services for them. So I think that there's dollars available. It's just a matter of us applying for those. And the commissioner, I keep saying the commissioner because I think he has done a wonderful job in making sure that the agency staff looks for resources that our districts need to be able to help the students that they serve and the communities that they serve. So I think, to your question, I think it's about what other resources are available that districts can apply for to be able to do the things that they had to do to go back to where they were August before the hurricane hit, and then to continue to build on those things.
And it sounds like, what resources are there, and how can we make the process of getting those resources more efficient? The streamlining that you mentioned. Yeah.
Yes. So I think I've heard from a lot of the districts saying, I can do a 3-pager. I just cannot do this book.
Yeah.
I think through the legislative session, in preparation for it, I think first of all, what Chairman Hunter, Chairman Lozano, Chairman Herrero, Senator Hinojosa have done for us here locally, what they did for us, they were in communication with us every second of the incident, shall we say. And I think staying in touch with them to work on insurance types of things so that we don't backslide off of windstorm and all of these other sorts of things. I don't know how that's going to turn out. I think the more we can do with them in preparation, I think the better off we'll be going into this session. Obviously, I think we talked to them separately about our local, keep it very local, what our local needs are, and from that conversation. Going into the session, the Association of Community Colleges, besides the funding ask that's always out there at the forefront, at the tip of that asking spear, if you will, dual credit is our #1 policy issue going forth. We're about to affirm our agenda. When I say our, I'm talking about the 50 community colleges in Texas. Our collective agenda in August, at the annual meeting, which, by the way, will be held here in Corpus Christi. So, there are a couple things, and I think just spending the time with our elected officials, hammering out, kind of debriefing, talking about what happened, what can be improved. When you give them the details, they absorb them. That's the kind of leadership we have. I think that'll make the difference at the next situation.
Yeah. Superintendent?
School finance is broken. It has been for a long time. And, in the last legislative session, there were some ideas and maybe some thoughts of some progress, but really, again, nothing came of it. And again, hate to use the phrase, but as far as school finance goes, Harvey was the perfect storm. Port Aransas ISD and many other districts in the state of Texas are considered property wealthy districts, which means that a percentage of our property taxes are sent then to the state for redistribution, either to property poor school districts or even maybe just to the general fund. We don't really know. And Port Aransas is one of those, but 20% of the property wealthy districts in the state of Texas were significantly impacted by Harvey. And so as a state, that's why I say it was a perfect storm, because now, the state relies on those recapture payments to fund other school districts. But then you look at a place like Port Aransas ISD, where for every dollar our local property owners pay in what we call M&O school property taxes, which is the biggest part of your bill, your tax bill. For every dollar paid by our local property owners in property taxes, 84 cents of every dollar is forwarded to the state of Texas. And so just this week, we transferred a $2.5 million payment from Port Aransas ISD to the state of Texas.
Wow.
And I think in the midst of a disaster like this, that is very hard for people to understand. It is very hard for a homeowner that hasn't been in their home in 8 months to pay their taxes and then know that 84 cents of every dollar in the midst of this disaster has been forwarded to the state of Texas. It's very hard for business owners who, if they've reopened, have spent every dollar, got every loan they possibly could to be able to reopen, and then say to those business owners, yes, 84 cents of every dollar you're paying in property taxes on your business right now after a disaster is being forwarded to the state of Texas. And I tell our lawmakers, you're going to have a hard time talking to the citizens of Port Aransas right now when for years and years they have paid their property taxes, and whether they liked it or not, somewhere in the back of their minds they said, well, at least it's going to help students in other school districts. But yet now that we are the ones in the disaster zone, we are the ones that are impacted. We are the ones where every single one of my students now qualifies for a free breakfast and lunch. We are still paying those kinds of taxes, directing them, I should say, back to the state of Texas. The other problem is for us, everybody says, well, how's it going? Well, we're doing okay right now. We have insurance, we have tax collections, we have the generosity of a lot of people. But if we call this year 0 for the storm, year 1 financially is where we're relying on the state of Texas, our legislators and TEA, to try to help us out a little bit. Because again, in the school finance world with recapture, your recapture payments are based on property values that are basically a year old. So next year, our recapture payments are going to be based on property values from before Harvey, yet our tax collections are going to be based on property values after Harvey. And depending on, the guesstimate from the appraisal district and everyone else, that could be a huge gap. In fact, for a while, we were afraid that our recapture payments were going to be more than our total tax collections for next year. Wow. Now that property values perhaps haven't dropped as much, it won't be that severe. But again, it's just a perfect example of how we've really got to look at of how we finance public schools in Texas. Because when you're that heavily dependent on property values, especially that heavily dependent on property values where hurricanes can wipe out 20% of your wealthy districts overnight, it hasn't worked in the last few decades, and I don't expect that it will. If we keep doing the same thing, it's not going to work. And so we're really asking our legislators to take a look at that and see what the state needs to do to provide an equitable, solid education for all students in Texas, regardless of where they live, without relying on property values that obviously overnight with the Harvey can really impact not only local school districts, but the entire state.
Well, I think that's a very strong note to conclude our conversation up here on stage. I would like to open it up to questions from the audience. If anyone wants to take a stand up, if we can hear you, or there's also microphones up here at the front of the room. If you guys are still thinking, I actually had an additional question. What is something that y'all have learned that you would pass on to other school districts, other community colleges in the state when it comes to just emergency preparedness? Sure.
I was waiting for that question. And I thought about it a lot. Yeah. It's how we react as institutions with so many lives that we're responsible for, so much property after lives. And we need to be brave enough, ready enough to make decisions and err on the side of safety. Don't sit there and second guess Mother Nature. Don't, that's been a pet peeve of mine since I arrived at Del Mar. And because I think heretofore decisions were being made by folks that just, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. And when you take steps to an error on the side of safety, an error on the side of lost instructional time and teaching days and all those kinds of things that we get admonished for or it costs you in certain ways. When you do that, I just see that it's got a much better outcome. I'll just say, just 2 short days before the storm hit, maybe 3, my wife and boys and I were out fishing in the lagoon, having a beautiful time. Not thinking about stuff in the back of my mind. I'm like, well, there's something. And we caught a lot of fish that day too. So it was a great day, but we were just oblivious that this thing might be coming our way because no one was really.
There wasn't a sense of urgency about it.
Yeah, maybe there was, but it wasn't with us. It just wasn't. It wasn't the overarching theme of get ready this week. You spend, if there's a storm in the Gulf, you get ready for the week. You prepare. Mark, you don't go fishing with your family 3 days before. It wasn't there. That's my lesson. But I think you're going to take heat. You're going to get criticized. as an administrator, oh, you scaredy cat, you chicken little, all kinds of stuff. It doesn't matter. Take it, plan, err on the side of safety. Use more time.
Yeah, and we can take a question, and then would love to hear from the other.
Sure, and there may not have been time to do much of this, but with the legislature, the last few sessions, putting a more emphasis on career and technical education and such a labor shortage for workers, especially in the construction trades, and so much rebuilding to be done, what is the Coastal Bend education community doing or looking at going forward to try to address that need?
So, a subject near and dear to my heart for many reasons. So many things. Again, it goes back to the relationships. You know, that pendulum after 4x4, after the legislature moved away from 4x4, and frankly, the depletion of our resources in the schools with technical labs and shop classes and those sorts of things, put the pressure on, I say the opportunity to community colleges to provide, and technical colleges to provide for that, right? So what's going on here? We don't have Sandrusi here, Mike Sandrusi with the Craft Training Center. We have a close partnership with them. We have close partnerships. We have 2,400 students in dual credit, many of those in the CTE areas. You know, we know that we're still behind the curve for Texas in terms of preparing that workforce. That pendulum is still moving back towards that. You know, when House Bill 5 came, opened up our channels, that still has its rough edges to provide for that. But getting back to it, you know, we have partnerships at all the schools. We're increasing dual credit in the CTE area. One of the things that I was so proud of at the last legislative session is where we actually crafted law together with Chewy Hinojosa and Trent Ashby out of East Texas that opened up the continuing education reimbursable classes from the state. In other words, we can receive money and help operate our classes to 17 and 16-year-olds, not just the 18-year-olds. We opened that wide open, rewrote that law. What was that for? That was to prepare the workforce at an earlier, give them an earlier opportunity to participate in a whole other section of our curriculum. It's that continuing education, non-credit side that unfortunately the state doesn't, hasn't fully valued yet. You know, we're still crafting laws for that. But aside from that, it's, credentialing every student at the Craft Training Center, drilling down into the high schools at an earlier and earlier age with that dual credit, and giving them those certificates like never before. I want to say that we don't have the numbers certified. I think we graduated. I think you hit a nerve, is what you did. A good one.
We do have one more question from the audience, so
I'll just say this.
Your thought, and then we'll.
I'll just say this.
Here.
I think at this last graduate, we haven't certified the numbers, but I think we graduated an all-time high number of candidates at this last graduation. Last year was a record, last spring, and I think we beat it this year. We're certifying that. We'll see. Stay tuned. But what we saw in there, Dr. Scott Elliff and I were just talking about this yesterday. What I hadn't seen before is I had a representative group from over 10 high schools walking across the stage. These are 10 high schools represented with dual credit, collegiate high school, Harold T. Branch, Veterans High School, all and a couple others in the area, Ingleside, I think, with certificates. Okay, that's the essence of preparing the workforce for the future. Sorry.
Wow. Sir.
Hi. Great panel, by the way. Thank you. So in the recent bipartisan tax bill, the federal government approved, I think it was $2.7 billion to the Department of Education. I don't know how much of that is coming for Hurricane Harvey, but just wanted to know, maybe this is for you, Mr. Alvarado, what involvement, if any, has the state government or the ESCs have or plan to have in the allocation of that money, and what does that process look like? Do you all have any thoughts on the timing on when that money could come from the federal government?
No, I'm not aware of that. I'm sure that the federal government speaks to the agency, and then they give us some information and we help to our schools. So I don't know the timeline for that.
And do you know will the ESCs be involved at all in distributing or figuring out how it will be distributed?
Typically it goes to the school
It'll be
district.
through grants.
Through grants.
Like the ones that he mentioned earlier, I'm sure. Again, we haven't seen a lot in writing yet, but I believe it'll be through grants. So the money will be given to the state, and then we will apply for grants.
Same will be for us. Skills development, JET grants, other things like that. Probably, hopefully we'll receive those at the state, and they'll be competitive.
Yes.
Okay. last call for questions. Okay. Well, I want to thank you guys so much for being here. This was a really enjoyable panel. And I want to remind everyone in the audience that there's lunch just right outside those doors. Thanks, everyone, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.